So thank you very much for setting that up, Stephen. I just want to remind everybody here with us today that we have you, when you come in, the cameras are off and the microphones are off. And so if you want to leave them that way, we would appreciate it. But if you do have a question, you can either unmute yourself, or maybe better just put that question in the chat, and then we'll address them near the end of the presentation. And I don't know, any other housekeeping that we need to address before we get started?
Yeah, wasn't there something that you needed to read out, Tanya?
Yes, there was. Let me go ahead and pull that up. I wanted to thank our sponsors. So I will go ahead and pull up those sponsors really quickly. And while I'm doing that, if you could introduce our guest from today.
Hi, so this is our second workshop with Proven Recruiting, which is a recruiting company that is based not only here in San Diego, but in other parts of the US too. Last time we had Nick from Dallas come and join us. Mm-hmm. Today we have two new members of Proven Recruiting coming to join us. One of them is Ingram Losner, who is actually the co-founder of Proven Recruiting, and he's had over 30 years of experience within the recruiting space. And our other presenter is Heather Henderson, who herself has over 20 years of experience in staffing within San Diego and other nationwide businesses. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mike. And
actually, I was going to say, I was going to thank the partners, but we'll do it at the end. I know we want to get started since we're going a little bit later. So take it away, Mike.
All right, awesome. Well, thanks everybody. I don't know if you continuation from the last resume workshop. Now it's interview prep and interview pre-prep. I'll let Ingram and Heather also do a little bit of an intro so you guys can learn a little about them. And I'll be the moderator running the slides. As we go through the slides, we'll try to be succinct with kind of going through each of the things that we're talk about. But then in addition, the Q&A will be a big portion just because we want to have everybody be able to collaborate and ask good questions, because I know this is a big topic of if you're interviewing now and interviewing in the future, I think it's an important thing to keep in mind. Yeah, let me start the slides here.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, we're excited about this. We're excited to have you all here. This is going to be great. And if you want to go ahead and share it, yep, we can see your screen. Looking good.
All righty. I don't know, Ingram and Heather, if you guys want to do a quick intro, we can start there.
Sure. Heather, you want to go first? Heather's on mute.
Heather's on mute.
Okay, why don't I go?
Muted.
There she is.
I did it.
Go ahead, Heather.
So as was said, I've been in the staffing industry now here in San Diego for 20 years. Mm-hmm. I work on both what's called the candidate side, which is helping people to find career growth opportunities. And I also work on the client side, which is helping to find talent for hiring managers to bring onto their team.
Okay. And as Stephen and Mike have said, I'm Ingram Losner, one of the co-founders and co-CEOs of Proven Recruiting, which we started 13 years ago. My background's a little more interesting than the last 13 years, as you guys can probably gather from my accent. I'm not from these parts, right? I always tell people that I'm from Alabama. Can't you tell from my accent? No, I'm from the UK. Came out here 25 years ago, been in recruiting actually for 30 of the 35 of my professional years. Before that, I was in accounting, didn't like accounting. So I went out and, started recruiting accountants, worked for a large national staffing company, a large national recruiting company before starting Proven. And many of the dynamics and ideas that inspire all of you guys with your wonderful ideas and your wonderful passion were really the driving force behind myself and my partner, Lewis, starting Proven. We wanted to create an entity, a recruiting firm that obviously recruited, but was able to provide levels of service in the marketplace and truly impact the lives of our candidates and our clients positively in a similar kind of way to the aspirational messages that each of you have communicated so well in your videos. So that's what drives us, and work with great people like Mike and Heather who really do all the hard work, who are at the desk level. My role is mainly running the business and driving the business. Thrilled to be here today and really honored to be part of this incredible group, and looking forward to interacting with many of you over the course of the next hour or so.
Wonderful. Thank you. So whenever we're ready, we can go ahead and start the slides.
All right. Probably start off with the icebreaker as well. Let me go to the next one here. But all right. So just to kind of, how are we going to do this? The show of hands, or maybe if everybody has their camera on, it'd be getting a good sense of how many people, I guess, students, how many current students are in the crowd here.
Okay,
Current
so
students.
like a thumbs up, we can, if you
Thumbs
go
up
to
would be good.
reactions. Okay, so there's a reactions, we can give a little thumbs up if we're a student, although I'm not.
Okay.
A reaction.
Let's see.
We're all students.
Almost all of them. Yeah, almost everyone.
Nice. All right.
Everyone, yeah.
And how about not students, but like in the workforce right now, working?
Working now, less,
Looks like less, but still a good amount.
Okay.
20,
And then-
25% maybe?
And then how about actually like people in positions to hire people? Like you are interviewing people.
Okay, so it's one. About four
All right.
people. Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
So a little bit more heavy on the interviewee side, but that's okay. All right. Just good perspective. But I'll let Ingram and Heather take it away here. But just to kind of give a brief overview, the agenda will be kind of going through the interviewee perspective. So as a candidate, when you're interviewing, the preparation, everything tied to that. Go into a little bit of logistics, like of a thank you note, have a little bit of the breakdown on here, so you can kind of take a look at what to do when you're, after you interview, and then the interviewer perspective. So those that are actually interviewing other candidates and other, people for a company, kind of getting into the mentality of that, and then opening up for Q&A, so everybody can ask good questions, and then just pick the brains of Ingram and Heather. All right, so I'll start. We'll go into the next slide here. Heather or Ingram can take it away.
Okay. Why don't I start, Heather? And I think the way that we decided to kind of break it up was for Heather to focus upon, the real key nuts and bolts strategies of the preparation and the follow-up. And then I'll give a little bit of a broader perspective as it relates to some of the intangibles, because, with any interview, right, there are tangibles and intangibles. With any application that you make, right, there are tangibles and intangibles. You either have the skills, you can check the boxes, or you don't. But then there is that extra 10, 15, 20%, which, can be absolutely critical in determining whether or not you impress the interviewer or whether you don't impress the interviewer. The first and probably the most significant thing that I would say is that, the interviewer needs to like you. All right. So when you're in an interview, when you're preparing for the interview, you've got to get into the mindset of, I'm going to smile, just like I saw in the videos, prior to this, prior to us starting this session, right? I could have watched those videos for the last half an hour without even knowing what, each of those phenomenal apps and those phenomenal ideas were doing. Just the passion and the attitude that came across is so critical to how you prepare yourself for an interview. You've got to get yourself in the right frame of mind, right? If that means listening to music, one of the guys on the videos was obviously a sports person, right? How do people get into the mood before they go out on the field of play for sporting events, right? Or when they're playing sports? You've got to get yourself in the mood, whether it's relaxing, whether it's daydreaming, whether it's listening to the music. Prepare yourself for the intangibles that are going to be so important, so that you can go out there and give of your best, so that when you're answering those questions, you're answering them not just in a mechanical, methodical, robotic kind of way. It actually means something. And remember, a significant percentage of what you say is how you say it and how the person receives it. So in terms of interview preparation for the intangibles, get yourself in the right frame of mind. Heather, over to you, and you can talk about some of the specifics.
Sure. So in order to be prepared for success, you definitely want to be sure to have some things in front of you. So oftentimes when people go into an interview, they feel like, oh, I can't have notes. I can't have, I need to be focused on looking someone straight in the eye. But just so you know, it is quite all right to have a printed out version of the job description, have a printed version of your resume, and even some notes that you have researched as far as what about the job description resonates with my experience, and what questions do I want to get answered during this, whether it's initial interview, second interview, final interview. So the mindset, to me, what I always coach people to do is think about it, the fact that you're going into this interview to determine whether or not the position is the right fit for you. So it kind of shifts your brain from thinking that you're having someone looking at you, trying to decide whether or not I'm the right fit, more to outside view of, I want to ask the questions and get a good sense of, do I want to work here? Is this a suitable role for my needs? And then with that discovery, then you're able to share some specific examples of what you've done and your skills will exemplify for the hiring manager that they do want to consider you as a top candidate. So that kind of goes into where it talks about the strategy, where you're honing in on 2 to 3 themes, with 3 to 4 concrete examples. Those are your extracting pieces of the job description, whether it be tangible technical skills or whether it be soft skills about your personality. And it's one thing for you to say oh, I have great customer service experience, versus actually sharing a story about well, one time when I was dealing with a difficult customer, and going into how you approached the situation and how you were able to get a positive result out of that. Ingram, do you have anything additional to add to kind of the initial preparation, just as far as the mindset goes?
No, I think mindset we've covered. I think you've covered all of the nuts and bolts checklists. It's about mental preparation and physical preparation, isn't it? The mental preparation comes from getting yourself into the right frame of mind, and the physical preparation comes from the research that Heather's just talked about in terms of what the role entails, what the company entails. Do a little research, as it relates to the interviewer, and have the questions. And yeah, practice. So mental preparation, physical preparation, which obviously involves research and practice.
And definitely look at the LinkedIn profile if the interviewer has a LinkedIn profile, and look to see what sort of commonalities might you have with that individual. Did you go to the same school? Have you worked in the same type of field or sector? Have you been in the same type of position? Because again, going back to what Ingram said, you want to get that interviewer to like you. And naturally, we tend to like people that are similar to us. And those similarities can come in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, Heather, did we talk enough about the STAR method, or are we going to do that when we go through the actual interview itself? Should we talk about that now?
I think that,
Yeah,
that's next.
Yeah.
Okay.
good transition.
There we go. You want me to go first with that one?
Sure. So the STAR method, you'll hear this as far as part of an interview. You'll hear this as part of, you might have heard it in the workshop for the resume about really focusing on what it stands for is situation, task, action, and result, right? So when you're putting together your resume, you want to think about what were the 2 maybe most important projects or contributions that you made within that role, right? And so then with that, you want to tell about what was the situation. For example, did nothing exist and did you create something from scratch? Okay. You talk about the task. So what did what were you tasked with? Were you solely responsible? Were you one of 3 team members? You're kind of setting the scene even further. And then the action is what did you specifically do? Did you, for example, with a mobile application, did you create the architecture and design, and did you do the UI of the application? And then what was the result? So again, talking about like that you were able to launch an application in iOS that was able to get, let's say 500 users within the first 3 months of launch, right? So you want to definitely quantify as much information as you can, and specifically to how it relates to generating revenue, generating like saving money, and then also saving time. So those are the things that you want to think about, because that's how you're going to bring value to that potential hiring manager, whether it be in the resume or going into deeper dive. Hopefully those things are on your resume for when you actually talk to the hiring manager. So just always really think of those concrete, specific examples to showcase your talent.
Yeah, and this particularly is important when it comes to looking at the 3 or 4 key areas that the job, or the key and the most critical responsibilities of the role. Because in some way, shape, or form, the interviewer is likely to want to assess your competence specifically within those critical areas of the role. And it may well be, for example, that one of the critical areas is, let's say, overcoming objections, right? If you're going for a sales role, right? Maybe overcoming objections is one of the critical areas. So the interviewer will ask a question that will be aligned with him or her testing your ability to overcome objections. And it will likely be phrased as follows. Give me an example of where in your past professional career you have had to overcome an objection, right? And that is where you apply the specific areas that Heather's just outlined, right? You've got to be specific in terms of the example. It can't be, well, I would do this or I would do that, because that gives the interviewer the idea, well, have they ever done it, or are they just trying to to convince me that they could do it? So you've got to give an example of how you've done it, and what the result was, and what you would do again, and what you do differently. And it's okay if you're happy to share a little humility and to come up with examples that perhaps haven't quite worked, right? So long as you're prepared to show why they didn't work and what you'd do something again. But you've got to be as specific as possible when addressing those critical areas along the lines of the STAR method that we've just talked about: situation, task, action, response, and be very, very specific in terms of your responses.
Great. Just to add to that, I think situation, task, action. So the action part, I think the important thing to keep in mind is also the concept of I versus we. Sometimes when we talk in generalizations of what we did, this is like your time to sell yourself. This is your time to talk about your experience and really hone in on qualifying and quantifying what you've done that separates you from somebody else. So it's accomplishments that you've done specifically to you that maybe you contributed to something, how you save time, how you save money, how you help the company make money. Those are very important concepts that both Ingram and Heather have touched on that definitely help separate you from someone else, because those things are unique to you. And that's why they hired you for that job, and maybe, what you can bring to the next job that you're looking at. Questions. Questions to ask, I think. Any concepts or thoughts on that, Heather and Ingram?
Yeah, I think Heather touched upon that a little bit in terms of the preparation. Don't go in there blind. You have an opportunity. You've got to think of it as an audition, because that effectively is what an interview is. It's an audition. So for any audition, you prepare. And so here, key areas Heather mentioned earlier on about, find out a little bit about, who it is that you're being interviewed by. There are multiple opportunities for you to be able to Google people, to look at people on LinkedIn or any of the other social media platforms. So just do your research and come up with 3 or 4 intelligent questions that touch upon the role, the individual, and the company. Heather?
People do also like to talk about themselves, right? So when you're speaking with a hiring manager, feel free to ask them what attracted them to come work for the company. what do they enjoy about working there, right? Because it's an opportunity for you, again, to bond with that individual, as well as hear what are some of the aspects that they like about the company and their role. So it's really important to learn those things. Oftentimes we do a lot better in interview situations when one of our friends has referred us to a company or to a hiring manager, because they can provide some additional color beyond just like the flat, what you see on LinkedIn or Google or whatever the case might be. So, definitely leverage all the relationships and connections that you might have to a company and to a hiring manager to be able to learn a bit more. And again, this will help you determine whether or not it would be the right opportunity for you.
So it looks like we do have a question in chat. I'm not sure if you're going to cover it at a later time, but Philippe asked, what can we say if we receive a job offer after an interview? So let's say you do the interview, completed it, and then you do another interview and actually get accepted to a different job. What is the thing you can tell the interviewer, like graciously? How can you basically let them down in a way that is good for all the parties involved?
Well, I would never decline an opportunity unless you have a written offer letter from the said company that you want to go work for. So definitely try to keep your options open until you get to the point of an official offer letter in hand. Secondly, San Diego is a very small city, if you want to call it a city, community, and you never want to burn a bridge. And so the best thing to do in the case of declining a job offer is to be very grateful for the consideration and for the offer, and just politely let them know that you have accepted a position elsewhere that you felt was in better alignment with what you're looking to do in your career goals. And again, the next thing would be to, again, thank them for their time and consideration, because you never know when you might come into contact with that hiring manager again, or perhaps like in 3 years, that same company wants to hire someone that, is the next greatest position for you. You just always want to leave everything with very good terms that handle things very professionally.
Yeah, completely.
Ingram, do you have anything else to add?
No, completely agree with that. And just, underpinning all of that is just be honest, right? Be honest and transparent. Companies understand, that in a hot employment market, good candidates are likely to be considered for more than one opportunity, and good candidates are likely to be attracted to companies and receive multiple offers. That people understand that. Interviewers have been in this situation themselves. So just transparency and honesty and courtesy. And as Heather has said, if you have that written offer in hand, and if you feel that you are more suited to that other job, shoot them a nice email, maybe even pick up the phone and call them and thank them, right? But net, make sure that you're leaving them disappointed, obviously, that you're not taking up their role, but understanding of your decision, and with a good feeling about you, because as Heather has said, in a market like San Diego, you are likely to be able to run into them at some point in the future. Yeah,
just to add on to that, I know San Diego seems like a big city, but it actually isn't, especially in the entrepreneurship community. If something gets burned, like, people will know about it.
Yeah.
And you definitely don't want to burn a bridge and go to a networking event and see that person and be like, they talk to other people and they're like, hey, this person said this and this to me. You don't really want that, even though it does seem like a big city. It's, in reality, it's actually not.
And you're actually right, Stephen. And you can also segment it out. The entrepreneurial community is relatively small. The tech community is relatively small. The finance and accounting community is relatively small. You're all going to be in those little niches, right, of your areas of specialization, and you're going to bump into people all the time. And you've touched on a great point. Networking is an integral part of how the San Diego business community operates. There are multiple events all the time, in a way that the larger cities like LA, San Francisco, New York, Dallas are not, right? San Diego is very, very connected in that way. So very, very important that you leave people with a very good taste in their mouths after you've had any kind of interaction with them.
Thank you for answering those questions. I hope that answers everything you needed, Philippe.
Sure. Thank you. Definitely. Thank you.
All right. So next piece after the interview, hopefully everything goes well. The thank you note, right? So we're going to go through it very briefly here, kind of just step by step, 5-step process of how to do it.
Mike, can I just make one other observation about the interview itself, because I think this is very important. I think started off by sharing enthusiastically how impressed I was with everybody's passion and enthusiasm when they were sharing their videos. And you want to show that during an interview, right? That's the intangible. You get prepared for it, you psych yourself up. However, there's one very important qualification, okay? There's no point in me or you going into an interview all fired up, ready to just shake the world if the person who is interviewing you is not like that. So to a degree, you've got to be very cognizant of the personality style of the person who is interviewing you. And this will actually filter through to the thank you notes that you send as well. If you're being interviewed by somebody like me or Heather, right, you're going to want to be passionate or enthusiastic, because that's what we clearly are, and that's what we clearly respond to. People, generally speaking, respond to people who are like them, generally, okay? So if, for example, you're going in as entrepreneurs, right, it can cut both ways. You can be a very creative, imaginative, entrepreneurial thinker that's very expressive in terms of their personalities, in which case it's okay to be that way. But a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of people that Heather recruits, the IT folks, are very analytical, and they reflect their personalities, or their personalities are reflected in a slightly different way. And in some cases, they can feel somewhat overwhelmed by somebody if they're coming at it really strong, very over enthusiastic, and so on and so forth. So you have to be a little bit careful, and to a degree, at least at the very beginning of the interview, mirror the kind of personality style of the person that is interviewing you. And that's very, very important. Once you've got into that neutral zone and established a rapport, then it's okay for you to be a little bit more expressive if you are expressive, or a little bit more analytic if you are analytic. So that's one of the intangibles that's really important. I might think that I had a great interview, and yet I might not necessarily have connected on the same personality level as the person that I'm being interviewed by. Back to you, Mike.
Mike, before you go to the thank you note, I have additional thing to interject about the interview. So make sure that at the end of the interview, that if this is a position that you're interested in, that you share and express your interest with the interviewer, okay? So you don't want to leave them hanging. It's kind of like, think about like a first date. When you go out with someone and you both are looking at each other and nobody is saying anything like, I had a great time, and you just separate and go your separate ways, you just wonder, like, will I ever hear from that person? Should I contact them? Like, what do I do? It's a very awkward situation. So same thing goes with an interview. If it is the position that you're interested in, don't play hard to get. Let the interviewer know what it is about the position that attracts you, whether it's specific duties involved, whether it's things about the company. And this kind of ties into what Mike is going to share about the thank you note. And then give them those concrete examples of your experience that you feel are going to enable you to hit the ground running, and showcasing the fact that from your understanding that you possess the skills and the attributes that the interviewer is looking for. And depending on your comfortability level, the next step would be to ask them, what are your thoughts about my suitability for the role? And to listen, just zip your lip and listen to what they say. Oftentimes in Southern California, we tend to not like conflict. So even if the person is thinking like, oh, I'm not really sure, they might not say anything, but the idea is to get them to think about what it is that you do have and how you match up to what they're looking for, and to give you some sort of reassurance about your suitability for the role. Now, if they happen to say anything like, well, you don't quite have as much experience in this area or in this area, then your reply is to say, thank you for sharing. When I started in my current role, I didn't have any experience with such and such. And what I did in order to ramp up quickly was this, that, and the other. And I seem to be able to do that very smoothly. So I feel like I'd be able to do the same thing with this particular area that, you know, maybe they're saying that you don't have. So the idea is just to show them that, you know, you're able to learn, that you're someone that enjoys learning. And then the final step would be to ask them, you know, what would be the next step? You know, for example, if you're in a first interview, most likely it's going to be a second interview, but you're wanting to understand what the process is, as far as like, is this a two interview process to hire? Is there going to be 3 interviews? Because you want to be able to know how to juggle multiple opportunities that you're hopefully exploring, so that you can know when to say, like, okay, I want this position, right? But if you're supposed to hear by Monday about a second interview and Tuesday comes along and you haven't heard anything, then that would be an appropriate time to follow up. Or come Wednesday, then you can kind of emotionally say, like, okay, chances are this isn't going to go anywhere, and just to be able to kind of let it go. But it's really important to know what that process looks like and when you might be hearing from people, just to manage your expectations and to juggle multiple opportunities.
Yeah. And Mike, can I just give, again, Heather's doing a phenomenal job when it comes to, the specifics and the tangibles. Can I just give one more example of an intangible, if that's okay?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. And it is actually different, right? There's differences in terms of the types of questions that Heather's candidates will be asked, for example, because Heather generally recruits for technical roles. And, there's a significant level of importance that's attached to whether or not you have the specific technical skills or whether you don't, right? There are other roles, such as the kind of role, the entrepreneurial roles, the roles that are less reliant upon specific skills and specific certifications, and more reliant upon, personality. Those are the kind of roles where the intangibles come into play significantly more. You would not have got in through the door. You would not have been selected for interview if the interviewer did not feel that you, for the most part, right, that they were fairly sure that you had the specific skills that were necessary to do the job. So again, I go back to the audition, right? And I go back to, whether they like you. All right. And I think it's slightly different for non-technical roles as it is for technical roles, but there's still that factor, whether they like you and whether you can relate and whether they feel that there's a personality mix. And just a quick tip here, which I think is relevant for how you conduct yourself during the interview and in the kind of note that you send after. And that is that personality style. And you can tell that personality style quite quickly in terms of how the person greets you, the speed with which they talk, the voice intonations, and also what's on their desk. Have a look at their desk. If their desks are full of clutter, pictures of their families, memorabilia, right? It'll tell you that they're a little more expressive and that it's okay to be a little more expressive yourself. If their desks are completely empty and there's nothing there, right, you know that they have no time for clutter and they're likely to be a lot more net, a lot more analytical in terms of their personality style. So I just want to throw that in because it's just a useful tip to be able to make an immediate assessment as to the extent to which you should be expressive or analytic during an interview and in terms of how you're answering the questions.
Awesome. All right, thanks. So on that end, I'm going to talk briefly about thinking we're a little over 30 minutes now, so I want to make sure there's enough time for Q&A because there's a lot of questions that maybe there might be answers for. So thank you. In general, straightforward greeting. I think the step-by-step here is pretty straightforward. thank them for their time, the transition. So the main thing I think is being memorable and being personable, right? This not only showcases your written abilities, but it's also showcases your desire for the job, right? So if you're really taking time to write a very thoughtful thank you note, it stands out and it shows to them that, okay, this person wants a job. And then it also ties into step 3, what are the 2 to 3 specific topics that they've mentioned in the interview that's exciting, that aligns with your passions, but then also step 4, closing out with a few things that have tied back your past experience to what you currently did. This also might be a good time to reiterate maybe something that was a concern that maybe you didn't necessarily have during the interview that you want to reiterate to that maybe a skill set you do have. So I think it's important to put that all in the thank you note, and also closing it with expressing the interest in the position. And then I usually suggest being forward about next steps. Hey, I'm going to be interested in hearing back from you by next week or next Thursday. I'll follow up by then just to kind of see where we're at, something along those lines. You definitely want to sign off with something simple, thank you and sincerely. But most important is, when we get thank you notes and we forward it over to people like our clients, the ones that stand out the most are the ones that are most thought out, and definitely take the time. Nowadays, I think in the past, written ones would be probably the best way to go about it, but mailing and sometimes, the efforts of time, I think an email would suffice as well. But usually you would write one to each person that you interview. Like if it's a panel, I always suggest making one personable to each one. You took the time to do it versus just writing, one email or one thank you note for like 5 different people. Heather and Ingram, I don't know your thoughts. I just wanted to make sure we highlight those things. That's an important
100%.
topic.
Yeah.
All right. So the other perspective, the interviewers. I don't know if we have as many interviewers here, but I think it would be good to go through a couple of slides to talk about this, the strategy, same layout, the strategy, the prep, and then maybe when it comes to questions to ask and then answering questions. So any thoughts on that? Ingram and Heather, however you guys want to start.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As an interviewer, what I'm looking for, right, is 2 things. And I'll design my questions based around these 2 things. One is, somewhat obvious, which is, questions as it relates to the STAR method, questions as it relates to whether or not they have the technical capability and the technical qualifications to be able to do the job. And maybe Heather can talk to that a little bit more specifically. But what I also look for, right, in terms of broad strategy, is whether or not they are aligned with, who we are as an organization. Are they aligned with our vision, mission, core values, and guiding principles, right? To what extent have they even bothered to find out what our vision, mission, core values, and guiding principles are? Because, there's 2 aspects of this. It's, can they do the job as outlined in the job specification, and are they are they aligned? And I think that as an interviewer, the common term is, do they fit? Are they a cultural fit? Well, we don't look for cultural fits, and the true, organizations that are committed to diversity look for culture adds, right? So, again, that's, something that's quite personal to us at Proven, right? But companies will generally look for technical capability and then quotes unquote personal suitability. And so as an interviewer, that's what I look for, because ultimately, I would not want to hire anybody, even if they are the best in the business at what they do, right? If they're going to, poison the environment, if they're going to, not get along with employees, if their core values and their moral compass, right, is a little different to our own. So as an interviewer, you look for, can they do the job, and are they aligned with who we are as an individual? Heather?
Tanya, did you have your hand raised up, or is that from earlier?
I was just going to ask a question, if this is an okay time to do that.
Of course.
Okay, so
why not?
I've had issues before with fit as a sort of catch-all way for organizations to discriminate. And how do you combat that? How do you deal with that? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's
mitigate for that.
And well, again, we deliberately do not look for culture fit, right? We say to people, we don't want everybody to be exactly the same. We don't want them to look the same. We don't want them to have come from the same schools. We want diversity, right? Not because we're committed to diversity, because it's a smart thing to do anyway. We want to be representative of the communities that we're seeking to serve.
Absolutely.
So, and quite frankly, I don't think that we've done a particularly good job of it. I think that we need to improve, like a lot of organizations. We're committed to it strategically, as I think a lot of organizations are. But we're embarking on a number of different initiatives which try and make diversity and inclusion real as it relates to every part of our business, rather than just have it in a business statement in the annual report.
Yeah, right. So, I think that's great advice. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Heather. Go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine.
Okay, I thought Heather was going to add something there. But so, okay, I agree wholeheartedly, Ingram. But do you have any like recommendations in terms of from the opposite side, from the outside? How do you combat that? How do you ensure that you are as an interviewee not being discriminated on when companies say things like fit, and it might mean, are you the same color?
I think it's obviously a very, very hard one to nail down, right? But you look around you as an interviewee, right? You're going into a company, right? You're going to be looking around, right? If a company is basically say, hey, you know what? We embrace diversity and inclusion, and basically everybody that you've seen, that you've walked around, is of one color, one ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know what? It's probably hot air. Okay. Also, if a company, for example, companies typically do interview panels. Okay. If, for example, you have 4 middle-aged white men on the panel, right? And they're saying, well, we promote, women are in positions of management and all the rest of it. It's nonsense. So, you have to try and look beyond what people are saying and what people are selling you, and look around, do a bit of research, look on Glassdoor, get a sense independently as to whether or not a company truly measures up to the DE&I standards to which all companies now should really be embracing.
Right, the places that you want to work. Great advice. Right. Thank you. Yes.
Does that help?
Very much so. Thank you so much for that.
Sure.
All right. Strategic parts and tangible. We talked about that. Obviously, being prepared with the questions in advance. How many times have clients come out? Sometimes, not often, but sometimes they're not prepared to interview the interviewee, and that always is not a good look either, right? So you definitely want to have that LinkedIn resume portfolio reviewed ahead of time, so that going into it, who you're talking to, what they've done, and it's not just kind of like a blank stare of asking questions that may not be relevant. So if we dive into the next set of things, so questions to ask and then answering questions. This is the last slide before the Q&A, but any thoughts on this, Ingram and Heather, just in general from your experiences?
I think the thing to remember is to be a human, right? Because you'll oftentimes hear the saying, like, people don't quit jobs, they quit hiring managers. So the opposite is true as well. The reverse is true, that, people will gravitate towards wanting to work for others, that there's a mutual respect, and that, that individual has a professionalism and has a passion that, is contagious and attractive, right? And so as a interviewer, and in my prior life to staffing, just thinking about interviewing, usually people do not feel comfortable being the interviewer or being the interviewee, right? So the most important thing on both sides of the equation, like whether you're the interviewer or the interviewee, is to be prepared and to practice and to role play with, people in your family and your loved ones and your friends, because it's just, the whole process is just unnatural. As human beings, we're not designed to necessarily do either side of the equation. And so you just want to make it as comfortable for the interviewee. And keep in mind that if you're talking to someone that's been in a position for the past 5-10 years, chances are that they don't feel comfortable interviewing and they don't necessarily want to make a change, right? Like they like things that are a little bit more consistent, and just be sensitive to those things, and be a kind person and have a smile on your face and make it easy for the interviewee to feel comfortable with you.
Yeah, I think that's the important thing as well. I mean, and you know, especially if you have a skill that is in high demand, you are selling your company, and that's very, very important. So you have to, you know, sell all aspects of the company and the role, and why you're there, and you know, tell the story, right? Tell the story and relate it to your own experience there, which presumably is good. Otherwise, they wouldn't necessarily have selected you to do the interviewing, and you know, sell it with a degree of excitement and enthusiasm, because you know, again, you know, the interviewee is there because, you know, at least in principle, they want to work there, and even though they may have multiple offers, like the gentleman earlier, you know, you've got to put your best foot forward, and you are a representative and an advocate for all that your company is good. And if your role is going to be, in many cases, you know, the interviewer will be the person to whom the interviewee will report once they join. So, you know, what Heather said earlier on about them liking you, it's really, really important. And, you know, if you don't hire the person, it means that there's going to be a vacancy. And if it's in your department, it means that, you know, you're going to have double the work. So very, very important that the interviewer goes into it with a mindset of, I got to sell my company here, and I want to ensure that I get this person if this person is qualified for the role.
Tanya, I think you raised your hand as well.
Yeah, you know, I can wait until a little bit if we want to wrap up, but I do have one other question when we do have time.
Okay. Any other tidbits on this piece, Ingram Lewis, or not Lewis, Ingram and Heather? If not, then we can we'll go to Q&A, and we'll keep it very open-ended and free reign to ask questions.
Just like I recommend that the interviewee express interest in the position to the interviewer, as the interviewer, if you're interested in the candidate, let them know, what qualities about them or experience that you think might be well suited. Because again, it really, you don't want to necessarily play hard to get, and to share with them what does the process look like, and what would next steps be, and define the timeline. Because if this is a candidate that you're really interested in, you want to move quickly and swiftly, and you want to keep them engaged and interested until you get them further along in your process.
Awesome. Would you mind if I started the Q&A out by asking a quick question that comes to me quite a bit? So,
Bring it.
Awesome. First of all, thank you so much for that presentation. That was just a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate it. I've been teaching entrepreneurship and business and HR management for years, but it's so nice getting that real world expertise. So thank you. My question, though, that I get all the time is, how knowledgeable do startup founders need to be about things like labor laws? So we see a lot of the requirements will start at companies of 25 or more employees, and so often I'll encourage my student founders to kind of just go out there, jump in with both feet, and then don't worry too much about making some mistakes. I don't know if that's bad advice, though. Maybe I'm not giving great advice. Obviously, we don't want to break laws, but I don't know. Any thoughts on this?
Mike, do you want me to go?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
I'd love to hear. I'll stop sharing, by the way, too.
Never bad advice to basically encourage people to make mistakes. Right? It's something that every entrepreneur needs to be able to do. Show me any entrepreneur, right, that has never made a mistake. I think Jeff Bezos, said he made 350 mistakes, before he hit upon the Amazon concept, right? So of course, entrepreneurs need to have that mentality of not being afraid to make mistakes. However, right, you do not want to fall foul, right, of California labor laws, and sadly, I know I'm going to dial back on that. Look, the California labor laws are there for a reason, clearly, right? Some would argue that they've become overburdensome, and I get that too. But the reality is there are way too many laws. There are way too many areas in which one must be compliant, specifically and especially as it relates to the hiring of people and labor codes. So my advice would be, set aside some of your entrepreneurial money to get advice. And it doesn't have to be with expensive $1,000 an hour labor lawyers. There are plenty of organizations, human resources organizations, such as SHRM, that provide really good services for relatively small amounts of money, right?
Or come to us, right? We have mentors at the REC for free, right? For free.
Right, absolutely. But the most important thing, Tanya, is you cannot afford to make mistakes in this area. You've got to be compliant.
What about the 25 thing? The 25 thing, I've heard that so many times.
Some are 25, some are 50. And again, there are so many different thresholds that businesses need to comply with in certain areas based around 5, 10, 50. You just you have to bite the bullet and accept the fact that you're going to need to spend some time and a little money, because falling foul of these laws can close you down. The penalties are severe for non-compliance, and it's just not worth it. And it will be such a shame, right, to have a phenomenal business idea not reach its full fruition because you're not compliant and you didn't take the appropriate advice.
Good advice. Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I always, like you said, I want to encourage failure. If you're not failing, you're failing, but that's excellent advice. There's some things we don't want to fail on.
No.
Great. So do we have other questions in the chat? Stephen or?
Nope, no questions in the chat. If anybody has a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself, turn on your camera if you want to, and ask. Otherwise,
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead,
I know
Mike.
the answer. I know somewhat of the answer, but Heather and Ingram, maybe your thoughts. So the one question that always comes up, right, is like, why are you looking to leave your position, right? Is there a way to answer that question the right way? I mean, I think a lot of that's always a topic that comes up. That's always a question that people ask, right? When you're looking to go for a new job and maybe you're in a good position and then you're like trying to go find something different. The why. Any suggestions on that?
Heather?
Sure, I'll take this. Well, hopefully you've thought about why, right? And it's a matter of being truthful. Because again, if you can't start the relationship with your potential hiring manager in an area of trust, then it's probably not going to go anywhere. So don't try to candy coat, sugarcoat, whatever the case might be, but be very succinct in your reason. If there is any sort of conflict that you're having in your current employer, either with your hiring manager or the company, then you want to handle it very gently, but to provide specifics as far as if it's a situation where you feel that you're not being treated fairly. Like, you want to take things that are very subjective to give very concrete examples of things that have happened, and even more importantly, what you've tried to do to resolve those issues. Because when people come to me and tell me they're trying to find a position because of this reason or that reason, that's exactly the exercise that I walk them through. Is I want to know specifically what has happened, what have they done to try to repair the relationship, and really it's a matter of how somebody handles conflict, because conflict is just a fact of life. That you don't want to be the person that's running away from a problem. You want to show that you've tried to resolve whatever issues you feel exist, and it just doesn't seem to be, resolvable, basically. But you don't want to like have a chip on your shoulder. You don't want to act as if you're a victim, right? You just want to say, so I just feel that at this time it's better for me to move forward. So that would be like in the case of, conflict. Now, in the case of like, say flat out you're bored, but you're not going to say I'm bored, but you would present it as such that I've been with my current company for 2 years, 3 years, whatever the case might be. And I feel that, I've done what I can to be a contributor to the current environment, and that I want to, and it's easy for me to talk about this with technologies because technologies are constantly evolving and sometimes companies don't evolve with the time. And so that's what I often see people making moves for, is that they feel stale with the tools that they're using and just the methods to develop. And so they're wanting to go on to something that's a little bit more forward thinking. So again, I think it's providing concrete examples. It's not having a chip on your shoulder. It's talking about what you've done to try to resolve it. Because even when I hear things about new technologies, I'll ask like, well, have you asked to work on new projects? Have you, what have you done to try to expand beyond where you are right now? And if someone hasn't done those things, then I'm very leery to represent them and help them make the next step, because I feel that they're going to run into the same problem the next place they go. Ingram?
Yeah, fully concur. And I think the try and put a positive spin on it is effectively, I think, what you're saying. Yes, you may well have to address situations, particularly if you are leaving for, quite frankly, why do most people leave jobs? It's because, for whatever reason, they're not aligned with their boss. But, yes, you have to be very, very careful about referencing any kind of conflict, because that's going to raise significant red flags. Try and put a positive spin on it, right? It's because, what, as Heather said, I've been here for a couple of years. I'm really looking for career growth. I'm eager to learn. I'm eager to develop. And I think that this role, the role that, you're talking about, and this particular company offers me the opportunity for career growth and development. You put the more you can put a positive spin on your rationale for moving, the better it sounds, and the more likely it's going to resonate with the interviewer.
I do have a question to add on to that. I know we're running low on time. I want to be wary of everybody's time, but on the flip side of that, in the case of not leaving company voluntarily, I should say, what if you have good experience with a company, but in the end, they are the ones that push you out?
Well, it depends on the reason for them pushing you out, right? But look, I mean, there are, especially in the last year or so, there have been many people that have been laid off or furloughed, right? So I think that, there's a broad level of understanding that over the course of the past year, if you've been laid off, it's not necessarily a reflection of your ability. Many people have been laid off during the pandemic. Now, if you've been, involuntarily terminated, right, for other reasons, whether it's for performance or for disciplinary reasons, then it gets, into, more sensitive areas. So, Stephen, it really depends upon why you've been let go. If it's a layoff because of a pandemic or a company rationalized, okay, company laid off people, they lost a big account, the pandemic impacted them adversely, they laid off a whole bunch of people. I was unfortunately one of the ones that they laid off. But if you're terminated for what's called cause, then it's a little more sensitive. Heather, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about like if you're laid off because of pandemic or because of more disciplinary action?
If you've been fired for performance, I think that's where Stephen was going.
Yeah. Again, you gotta bite the bullet and be truthful, right? And giving specific examples of maybe what happened, and if it was something where it was circumstantial, maybe you had an ill family member that you were taking care of, and that distracted you from giving 100% in your job, or it caused you to have attendance issues or whatever the case might be. The person is going to want to hear that you're owning up to whatever went wrong, and they're going to want to understand why things went wrong, and what are you going to do to prevent them from reoccurring should they hire you.
So I was going to just thank you. Again, great advice. I just wanted to jump in and just let, I do know we have some students that need to go on to their next exams and things like this. If you do need to take off, we want to thank you for coming. Say have a great night. But if I don't know if Ingram and Heather you have and Mike, if you have maybe a couple more minutes, but I know there are a few people who had some questions still. If you're able to stay with us, maybe another.
Of course.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So for those who have to leave, goodbye.
Yeah, sure,
Thank
no
you for
problem.
coming, and thank you for sticking around for those that can stay. And I don't know who was next.
I think I saw
maybe-
Kimberly and then Priscilla and then Philippe, but
Great,
Felipe.
thanks.
But feel free, yeah, Kimberly.
Kimberly, whenever you're ready. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay, I just have a quick question, and I kind of brought it up last time you were here, Mike, but I haven't worked in over a decade, and it was because I have a disability that just kind of grew with me, and I wasn't able to work, but then I had kids, so I continued the time off. Well, I might have just had surgery that fixed me, so I might be able to go back to work in the next year or two. So on our resume, Mike told me to put that down, you know, that I was not able to work, and that's why I've been out of work for 12 years. When I go to an interview, do I explain that I was disabled and that's why I haven't worked? Or do I tell them it's both? I was taking care of my children and having children and disabled. I mean, are they even going to want someone who is disabled?
I mean, look, it clearly depends on, you know, the extent to which the disability is going to prevent you from doing the job. And that's something that's, you know, personal to you. And you know, companies, most companies, well, you can't discriminate against people that have disabilities.
As
But
long as they can do the job, right?
Right, as long as they can do the job.
Yeah.
You know, it's up to you what you disclose. If you believe that you have all of the capabilities and the qualifications to be able to do the job, right, then you know, you can be as open about it as you feel comfortable. So you know, it's really up to you, Kimberly. And you know, it's going to be it's challenging enough for anybody to get back into the workplace, as I'm sure you're more than aware, after being away for a decade. But people do, right? There are plenty of working parents that stay at home, that get back into the workplace. So again, I think as I think it was Heather that said earlier on, you know, be transparent, be honest, be authentic, and you know, if you're real and if you share and people then hire you on the basis of that, great. You don't want to start off the relationship by withholding information that might ultimately come back to hurt you as you know, if and when you get the job. I don't know whether that helps, right? I wish I could be more specific. Heather, do you have anything that you would add to that?
I mean, I think it is the transparency and the honesty. You know, with medical conditions, there are definitely laws that protect you, right? As far as from having to disclose specifics about things. So it just really depends on, you know, how comfortable you feel with that interviewer. You know, does it make sense to put it as far as like, well, I chose to not work, or I didn't work because of personal and family reasons. You know, again, some interviewers might just leave it as that at that. Others might kind of dig at it a bit and try to understand, like, why is your situation changed now versus a year ago, 2 years ago, right? Because when people are reentering the workforce, that's the question that the interviewer has, is like, is this person going to be mentally and physically able to do this? Meaning that, like, you know, do the obligations that this person had with their family before, are those obligations no longer needed, or whatever the case might be? They just want to be assured that they're going to have your 100%, you know, attention and commitment to the role that they're looking to fill.
Right. No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course.
You're welcome. Congratulations on being able to return to work soon. That's fabulous.
It's great.
Felipe, I don't know if you had your hand raised.
Yeah. So firstly, thanks for this great presentation. I'd like to ask you, what is your best advice when someone doesn't know how to answer a question during the interview?
Heather?
As the interviewer or as the interviewee?
In both cases.
In both cases?
Yeah.
Well, I would say with the interviewee, if you don't know how to answer the question, it might be because you're not sure what's being asked. So with that being said, try and get some clarity as far as what the interviewer is asking of you. Do you want to give me kind of an example? Do you want to role play that with me?
For instance, there is some cases like you are asked to answer a kind of tech question, and you probably don't know.
Okay, okay, so for example, they're trying to get a sense of your experience using a particular tool or programming language or a design pattern. Is that what you're referencing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. For instance,
Okay.
recently I was requested to answer a kind of like 50 tech questions. So that is the real example for sure.
Okay, and was it in a format where you were having to like enter your responses, or was it in a dynamic where you're talking to someone and they were going through those questions with you?
Yes, it was a face-to-face interview. Yeah, I did
Okay.
the first step, and the second step was to meet with the tech team.
Okay, okay. So in that particular case, my recommendation would be, well, to respond saying, that's a great question. I don't have the answer at hand, but what I would do is I would go to Google, or I would go to GitHub or Reddit or whatever the case might be, and kind of share with the interviewer what your process would be to find the answer. I've been told a story. It wasn't my candidate directly, but I've been told a story where someone was actually in a whiteboarding exercise, and they asked her like, okay, now what would you do? And she literally wrote on the whiteboard, Google. So there's definitely, and she still got the job. So it's not necessarily that someone expects you to know how to do everything, but they want to know what is your thought process on finding the solution, and whether that's even kind of talking it through with them and saying like, well, I see what I'm thinking I would do would be try to do this. Like, what are your thoughts on that? And get the interviewer to really interact with you and help kind of guide you to the right solution.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Priscilla, sorry, you've been patiently waiting. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So going off on what Felipe said, so one of my questions was, if you don't know the answer to a question, is it better to make something up or just say like, I don't know this question? Because obviously I feel like you can tell as the interviewer that I'm like stuttering and I obviously don't know the answer to that question. So what's the best advice?
Never
My advice is always to be honest. Honest and transparent. But go ahead, Ingram.
No, I was never make something up. I think, you know, you if you don't know the answer, then you know, approach it in the way that Heather suggested that you approach the last question, but never make something up. People will soon smell, you know, BS basically. That just doesn't work. So, you know, be honest, right? You know, I've not come across something as specific as that, but here's how I would go about it. Right. So, you know, as Heather said earlier, in many cases, they're looking for how you would think about your solution to addressing a question or a problem, rather than whether or not you know the answer. But yes, the one golden rule, right? Never make stuff up and keep your fingers crossed.
Okay. I also wanted to ask, sorry, what else?
No, I was saying never make stuff up and keep your fingers crossed, right?
Okay.
Or pray.
Yeah.
That's not the ideal way of going about it.
Okay, thank you. I also had another question. If when they ask you like what areas of improvement, like things that you could work on, so what are good options to say when it comes to that? Like, how honest do you want me to be when you ask that question?
Ooh, can I take this
I
one?
can answer this
Yeah, go
for
ahead,
you.
Mike.
So
I'll let
generally
Heather.
speaking, our strengths are also our weaknesses, right? So you want to think about, which strengths that you want to bring forth as being your strengths and which strengths you want to bring forth as being your, and I try not to look them at as weaknesses, but vulnerabilities or opportunity to improve, right? So for example, attention to detail, that could be looked at as either a strength or weakness in the sense of how do you utilize it, right? If you have a very strong attention to detail, maybe your opportunity for improvement is that, you've learned to put a time limit on certain tasks instead of being, a perfectionist and having too strong of an attention to detail and basically, going overboard, right? So you want to give them specific examples of when maybe your strength was a vulnerability and what have you learned to do in order to overcome that, and how do you now kind of keep tabs on that for yourself.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to add to that.
Mike or Ingram?
This is my favorite question. I was going to ask this question earlier, but so the weakness question, right? I think that what we always preach when it comes to interview prep, you don't reiterate the word weakness. Area improvement is most important. I think Heather touched on that most importantly. And sometimes if you think about area improvement, it's something that you've done. Maybe it's an area that was a weakness that you spun it to the positive. You always want to spin things to the positive and not focal point be on what you're currently like, hey, this is my glaring weakness, right? It's how have you taken that step? Maybe it was something, an area of improvement that was a focal point early in your career, but now that you've kind of gotten, a little bit more experience or a little bit more exposure, you've gotten better at it. And now this is what I've done to make an improvement. And the focal point should end with the positive. You always want to spin things to the positive during the interview because it doesn't want to be a glaring weakness, or then it's a kind of a red flag for them as well too, right?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So if you guys don't mind, I just want to add one last little thing that I'd love to ask. And I saw that you shared your contact information, and thank you so much for doing that. And I just wanted to make sure that it would be okay just for us internally to share with our internal platform, if that's all right, in case any of the students had any more questions. And
Absolutely, an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. Yeah. Anything else from anyone? I don't want to step on any toes, or you guys want to take us out then?
Sure. Well, of course, thanks Rec Innovation, Tanya, Stephen, Angela, everybody there as well, the helping and coordinating this. Each time we do it is always, I feel like I learn more about even the interview process and the resume workshops, and I'll thank you everybody for joining. It's really great to collaborate and just offer insight. Sometimes you never realize how much knowledge you can share and provide to the community and really make an impact. Heather and Ingram.
No, I just want to say something, Tanya. Kudos to you and your team here, because we're all inspired by aspiration, and what comes through from the people on the call, from the videos that you shared so kindly at the beginning, right? Is the future's in good hands, right? With people like these students and the people that are part of your program.
Thank you.
Keep up the great work. We're proud. We're thrilled to be able to partner with you, and let us know if we can help in any way.
Ditto right back at you. Thank you so much. You made my day, right? Made my day. Thank you for saying that.
Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Appreciate everything.